Welcome to The Real News. I'm Eddie Conway from Baltimore. Today in the studio with me, I have a Pulitzer Prize winning author of Days of Destruction and Days of Revolt. Please join me in welcoming Chris Hedges.
Thank you, Eddie.
Okay. I have been talking to you earlier about the business of the prison industrial complex and how it's impacting the lives of prisoners and their families. And you shared that you had some experience. Can you share a little bit of that with me now?
Well, you know, I've been teaching in prisons in New Jersey for a long time, almost 10 years. And what I've watched over the last decade, and it's probably something you saw when you were incarcerated, is how they increasingly prey on the prisoners and their families to make money. And that occurs by turning commissaries over to private corporations. And because it's a captive market, they can charge anything they want. So for instance, we got commissary prices from 1996. We compared them with prices today. And we're talking about basic staples, toothpaste. We were talking earlier about noodles. You know, what people don't know is most prisoners live on those noodles that they have to heat up. Price increases as high as over 100%, almost everything at least over 50%, and yet what they earn has remained the same. So the minimum wage, I'm talking for 8 hours of work, and in many of these prisons we have for-profit corporations exploiting prison labor, the neo-slavery under the 13th Amendment, which permits prisoners to work for far below reasonable wages. So their minimum wage is $1.30 for 8 hours of work, which is roughly $28 a month, but their commissary prices, and we're talking about things that they need, deodorant, toothpaste, have risen by over 100%. The other way that they exploit the people under the system of mass incarceration is turning phones over to private corporations. So in New Jersey, it's 15 cents a minute, plus the premium that you have to pay in order to put the money on your account. The surcharge tax that the state puts on all commissary items of 10%. So if you have a 5-cent comb, this is an actual example, it costs you 6 cents. And then the removal of items that people who are, when they were incarcerated, used to get. Jackets, blankets. They used to give you 2 blankets, now they give you 1. They don't give you thermals anymore. You have to buy them through the commissary. And most importantly, shoes.
Well, I'm just, because I personally have experienced that myself in terms of seeing like young guys in the population that just arrived in the last 2 or 3 years no longer get the things that we used to get when we came into prison. So I see guys walking around in the dead of the winter without coats and without actually boots. They're running around in summer tennis shoes and stuff. What's this cutback? I thought that the prison industrial complex was making a lot of money. Why is this happening?
Well, because it forces those who are incarcerated to go to the commissary and buy the items. So let's talk about shoes. And I don't know what your experience was, but this is how it is in New Jersey. You're not issued shoes anymore. You have to buy them. You pay $45. Now remember, these people are making $28 a month. Mm-hmm. And we haven't even spoken about the fines. So a lot of those people get into the system and they owe thousands of dollars of fines, which are chipped out of their monthly salary. So for instance, one of the students that I teach, who was incarcerated when he was 14, he's now 39, still owes $6,000 of fines. So they want to buy a pair of Reeboks. It costs, if they don't have the $45, and most people don't get, 80+% do not get money from the outside on a monthly basis. They may get over the holidays or something, but they're kind of on their own. If they can't afford the $45 Reeboks or the boots, they sell these sneakers with, with cardboard soles. It's like something out of Dickens that as soon as you go out into the yard, they're shredded. Because many of these prisons are quite old, they need the thermals. And then we haven't even spoken about bereavement. So that if you want to visit with a dying member of your immediate family, a mother or father or whatever, you can do so for 15 minutes, either a deathbed visit or you can go for a viewing, but you have to pay for the guards to accompany you, which is $800. And that immediately, so what I have seen over the last few years...
Well, let me just, because that's happening in New Jersey. In Maryland, they don't even allow you to do that anymore. They actually cut that out.
You mean
completely.
The bereavement visits?
Yeah, the bereavement visits, and that's very harmful to the prisoner because you don't get a chance to kind of like make your peace with that person that you love who's departed. So you end up suffering, that loss and no way of figuring out how to grieve, right?
Yeah.
But go ahead. I'm just
Well,
curious.
it's just all the ways that they have found mechanisms to economically exploit prisoners and their families. It used to be that you could send up to 50 pounds, I think it was a year, of goods like sneakers and stuff, which they've now abolished. And that, of course, makes it harder because now the prisoner has to buy the items from, this kind of in-house Walmart. And it also hurts the families who are unable to feel in a way that they can care for their sons or their daughters or their husbands or wives or whatever. But what I find most disturbing is there seems to be every year some new mechanism to squeeze more money out of the poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. And I think that probably is something you saw within the system as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that they turned the state of Maryland actually was responsible for supplying all the items in the commissary: soap, toothpaste,
right,
deodorant, food, something to drink, that kind of stuff. They turned all of that commercial stuff over to a company it's out of Ohio, I believe, called Kiefer. And that company operates commissaries in several states, including Florida. And they were up, in fact, for a class action suit because of the way they changed the prices. One example is the envelopes. We used to get a pack of 50 envelopes for 99 cents. They would come in a box. If you want to write, you would buy a box of envelopes and it would last you for 50 letters. When Kiefer took over, you could only get single envelopes and they cost 10 cents a piece.
Right.
So that the price of that 50 envelopes turned into $5.
Right.
Just automatically, and you did not have a choice. You either buy from them or you didn't send out any mail. And they did that time and time again with the basic food stuff that they knew we needed to eat. They upped the price 200-300%, So yeah, that and the state of Maryland in turn gets a fee for that.
Right.
So just like they get a fee from the phone company that, as you were saying, exploits the families and the prisoners, because if a prisoner calls home and the person accepts the phone call, it's extra money for accepting that phone call above and beyond what it would be if it was a public.
Well, and they have to put money on the account and they have to pay a fee. So if you're putting, I can't remember the exact figure, but if you're putting $10 on the account, you're paying $3 or $4 just for the privilege of putting the $10 on.
Yeah.
And then we get the whole issue of privatizing the way money is sent into the prison. So it used to be that you could send a money order or something in and you could put it on a prisoner's account. Now it is all done through a company in Florida where if you want to put $20 on the account, you're charged quite a draconian fee. And again, I don't have the figures right in front of me, but again, I think it's up to $5. And that $5 evaporates, at least from your pocket, into the pocket of the for-profit company that's handling this. So this has been a kind of momentum that we've seen internally, within the prison system. And I think it reflects the kind of predatory nature of unregulated capitalism throughout the society. Because those corporations, which are in essence kind of squeezing all of us, will squeeze the defenseless, and that's what prisoners are in essence, a captive society. They will squeeze the defenseless in ways that are just inhuman because they can.
Let's look at it from the other side, because while I was in the prison system, they made chairs, they made clothes, they trained dogs.
Right.
There's all kinds of industries. Obviously, the license tags.
Right.
There's
military industries, Kevlar.
Yeah. So why they're squeezing the prisoners and fleecing the population for whatever pennies they can get? Aren't they making a tremendous amount of money by using that slave labor to produce stuff? I mean,
It's neo-slavery, which under the 13th Amendment is legal. You can force people under the 13th Amendment to work without, adequate wages as part of, your punishment, in essence. And so we have seen, along with this exploitation, a growth of for-profit industries, private companies that are going in there and exploiting the prison labor. So on the one hand, they're using the prison labor to make profit, and on the other hand, they're taking that underpaid. We can't even call it underpaid when you're making $1.30 for an 8-hour day. They're taking that and they're taking what little money they have, and that's not a new phenomena for African Americans. It replicates precisely what sharecroppers went through, where they had to borrow to buy the seed and often the farm implements and pay the rent. And by the end, especially if the crop didn't do well, they can work a whole season and end up in debt. So now you're seeing people released from the prison system, and they owe money to the state. And if they can't pay that money, they get picked up again.
Yeah. And there's something, even as you were talking, there was another aspect that I was thinking of. Early on, several decades ago, I can clearly remember that there was this huge campaign to stop prisons from being built in certain neighborhoods in certain counties. And there was a desperation. The population was exploding in the prison system, and the state needed places in which to build prisons. And they went to different counties and whatnot, and they could not get authorization to build prisons. And so at some point, they started deindustrializing America, and jobs disappeared, not only just out of the black community, but jobs disappeared out of the rural communities.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, in all of these counties, there were requests, like put a prison here. And so, when you talk about that economic slavery thing, it just reminds me of Hagerstown, and it reminds me of Cumberland. And in Cumberland, Maryland, there's a massive prison complex up there now, and it's the source of jobs and economics in that region. And inside those prisons is population from the urban centers of black. The population is mainly black, the guard force is mainly white, and it's an economic arrangement similar to slavery that you were saying.
Well, the students that I teach often refer to prison as being a plantation, having the dynamics of a plantation, including, which is something, writers like Richard Wright, Baldwin, and others talk about, understanding the demeanor by which you comport yourself in front of the guards who are all powerful. And when you get up to these communities, and Mumia Abu-Jamal is up in Frackville, Pennsylvania, and when you go in to the prison, you will see on the lists of the corrections officers who work in the prison 3, 4, maybe up to 8 of the last names. Because their brothers in there, their cousins in there, maybe even their spouses in there.
Their sons.
Their sons in there.
And daughters
and
now.
daughters. It's the only business going. And I think what's so heartbreaking, I've driven up and seen Mumia a couple times, is those buses that leave at about midnight or 1 in the morning from places like Newark or wherever, or Philly, bringing the families and bringing the kids. And we haven't even spoken about how visitors are treated.
Well, let's do that. We'll do that. We're going to come back for another segment, and we're going to talk about the treatment of family members and so on and other things. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network. Welcome to the Real News. I'm Eddie Conway from Baltimore. Thanks for joining us again for this second part with Pulitzer Prize winning author Chris Hedges, author of Days of Destruction and Days of Revolt. The last time we were talking, we decided we was going to look at this segment of the treatment of family life in prisons. Chris, you were saying that the members of people's families suffer as a result of visiting their loved ones in prisons?
Well, because they're treated as if they're prisoners. And they're, oftentimes the corrections officers can be quite brusque and rude, expelling people capriciously for an item of clothing, demeanor. But I think what's most disturbing is watching the little kids come in, because they're terrified and they're clinging to their mothers. They're often crying, and so visiting their father, their brother, and of course at times their mother becomes traumatic. And I'm interested. I'll ask you, but I mean, within the prisons that I teach, it's not uncommon, especially when I have lifers, where they've told their families just not to come anymore. It's too, the cost, the emotional cost for them and for the family is so much. And I think one of the things that often occurs for people who have extremely long sentences is that they will turn to a girlfriend, to a spouse, and they'll just say, forget about me. I'm kind of dead. You have to go on with your life. And the wear and tear, I mean, the way that relationships will disintegrate under that kind of pressure, not only between partners, but between parents and children. And I think that that's, for me, one of the kind of cruelest aspects of the whole process, because in many ways, it seems to be designed in such a way as to discourage, the maintenance of any kind of familial ties at all. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
I actually have, and I'm still suffering pain from this, an experience like that. I mean, initially when I was locked up, my father came to visit me, and I loved my father, and my father loved me for my whole entire life. And he came and he said, look, if you need anything, just tell somebody or send for it or whatever you need, I'll give it to you. But I cannot come in this prison and have those doors slammed on me and then walk out this prison and know that you're still in here. It's too painful. And 20 years later, before I saw my father again, and when I saw him the next time, he was getting ready to pass away, and I could tell when he came to visit me that it was something really serious, because I hadn't seen him in 20 years, and that loss of that love was there, and prisons are designed to do it. And I've had a number of cases where prisoners have said, I don't want you to be treated like a prisoner.
Yeah.
They say that to their mother or to their loved one or to their sister or their brother or their child. Or they won't even let their children come in because they don't want their child the children to be dehumanized.
Right.
And that's part of that process that happens. And it's probably one of the most destructive things of the entire prison slavery slash industry is to dehumanize people and separate them from their family, while at the same time claiming to be a correctional institution and claiming to rehabilitate or make people whole. It actually destroys families. It's designed to destroy families.
It is designed. And, you know, I remember I was teaching a class once and I had an older student, just, you know, as an offhand comment, not even something that he particularly thought about, say, just because your family doesn't visit you doesn't mean they don't love you. And for me, that captured a kind of ocean of pain that so many of those who are incarcerated have to cope with. And I think that, you know, because it is destructive, I mean, you will watch, you know, the kind of pressure that it puts on relationships over the years, and those relationships often, because of that pressure, are extinguished. So I had a student who, his wife came to visit him with their 6-year-old son, and the 6-year-old son starts talking about Uncle Jimmy. Well, it becomes pretty clear who Uncle Jimmy is. And as his wife gets up to leave, he said, I don't care, you know, I understand, but just don't stop bringing my son. He never saw his son again. His son's in his 20s. And that kind of, you know, the one thing they want is, especially since so many of them are fathers, is to maintain some kind of a relationship. And the way the system itself is built, the kind of physical and emotional gauntlet that families, and in particular children, have to run in order to even connect with their parent or their brother or their sister, or whatever, is so excruciating that finally, as you said, they can't do it, and those who are incarcerated don't want to see them go through it. So that experience that you had with your father is actually not uncommon. And I think in some ways they want it like that, because there is such an overt hostility to those who visit, because it's a headache for the guards. And they want to make it, I think, you know, intentionally. I mean, you know, for instance, people will have to, in some of these older prisons, I don't know how it was in Maryland, but we have prisons in New Jersey, where people have to wait out in the snow and the rain, elderly parents, for hours, and there isn't even a bathroom facility for them.
Yeah, no.
And by the time they get into the prison, they're shivering, they're wet. They could have sat out there for 3-4 hours.
No, that's true here in Maryland. But you know, one of the things, even as we were talking, I was thinking about one of the reasons I think they do this is because they don't want families to organize. They don't want families to come in a regular, consistent way and meet other families that have those same kind of problems, and to maybe talk and say, well, look, let's get together and figure out how we can address this. That's their greatest fear in prisons, is prisoners organizing and families organizing. And that's also the solution to changing.
I think it's the only solution now. I don't think that, because these the prison industrial complex, which is making money hand over fist. I mean, you look at the website of Corrections Corp of America. I mean, you should pull it up, and it's pretty amazing, because they say you should invest in our company because recidivism rates are over 60%. I think they're 64%. So it's guaranteed that this is a good business. And, you know, because these moneyed interests now, these phone companies, these commissary companies, all of these suppliers are profiting and making tremendous profits off of mass incarceration, because their lobbyists are paying off politicians, writing legislation, and in essence, you know, writing laws, you know, authoring laws that are embraced by the judiciary. And we've seen over the last, we were talking in the first segment, that the economic situation for both prisoners and their families is deteriorating as these for-profit corporations prey more and more and more, exploit them, to take money from them. I think organization is the only hope we have left, and I think what you said makes a great deal of sense. Now, in Florida, there is an organization of families of incarcerated, which has been able, through protests and organizing, to ameliorate some of the conditions in the prison. I mean, we've still not dealt with neo-slavery and the very existence of mass incarceration, but around issues such as visitation, and we have had states now, I think New York State has banned this. They reduced the phone rates, I think it's New York, to about 5 cents a minute, which is what it should be, instead of 15 cents a minute. But yes, I think that's a really interesting point that you make, and I think it's correct, because that is the only mechanism. I don't know what you think, but I think that's the only mechanism we have left by which we can begin to halt, this, increasingly rapacious assault against the poorest of the poor and the weakest of the weak.
Well, one of the things is that to prove what you're saying in terms of organizing it's something I did some years ago. I organized in the prison system, and initially when I got in the prison system, I was thinking like, okay, we're being treated like animals. We need to probably rebel. We need to stand up for our rights. We need to figure out how to fight back to resist this kind of dehumanization. And then somewhere along the line, it dawned on me and some of the people that I was working with, organizing, that, well, we're being treated like this because we're not organized, we're not unionized, we're not in the position to ask for minimum wage. So we organize a United Prisoners Labor Union, and we plugged into 1199E, the organization that Martin Luther King was working with when he got assassinated. And we started organizing in the population, and we signed up enough people in the population to actually have a union. And of all the things, of all the years that we've done, the most terrifying thing for the officials was that prison labor union.
And you were asking for minimum wage?
We were asking for minimum wage, and they realized that if they gave us minimum wage, they would have to let us go home.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't afford to have us working in the prison system. So they just did all kind of draconian kind of activities, and eventually they did the midnight raids. They snatched us up, they locked us away, but it was the actual organizing that they feared.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the families today. And today, probably more than any other time, that is needed, because the one thing that I see when you talk about the recidivism rate, in the prison system, they're doing nothing at all to rehabilitate people. They took out the college programs, which was actually guaranteeing people staying out in the community.
See, we have it in New Jersey. That's what I teach.
You do?
Yeah.
Is it accredited?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's new, but it's important. And we know from studies that people who get their degree in prison, I think there was a study in Massachusetts when they had a program, it was a 4% recidivism.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if
but
you...
say that, people say the system doesn't work, they're wrong. The system works just the way it's designed to work.
Right,
because poor people of color on the streets of Baltimore, or the streets of Newark, or the streets of Camden, or the streets of Detroit are worth nothing in the eyes of the corporate state, which has moved manufacturing overseas where people are earning 22 cents an hour. They're only worth something behind cages or locked in cages where they can generate $40,000 or $50,000 a year.
Yes.
That's the way the system's designed.
Yeah, from the other taxpayers.
Yes, well, this is like so many of these corporate entities, like the defense industry, the security and surveillance industry. They prey on taxpayer money. So and that's why we're seeing charter schools and the destruction of public education. It's the same logic, where you have hedge funds who are funding schools in the inner city. It's not because they want to teach poor black children how to read and write. It's because the Department of Education spends $600 billion a year and they want it. And we see that in education, we see that with defense contractors. We see that we have 16 intelligence agencies, and 70% of the work is outsourced to private corporations, and we see it in the prison industrial complex as well. It's all part of. It's just one more piece of the puzzle.
Well, thank you. This has been very enlightening, even for me. And hopefully you'll be back again in the future. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Eddie.
And thank you for joining The Real News.